The Wiscan Imperium's judgment arrived without ceremony, just data. A stream of updated war readiness evaluations poured across the Galactic Coalition's shared channels, each assessment accompanied by projected deployment estimates, infrastructure viability scores, and final integration models. For most civilizations, it was a formality, but for Earth, the entry was damning. Active combatant count 1,123,409. The value wasn't questioned. It was catalogued, compared, and dismissed in under a second by the Imperium's hierarchy engines. Earth's military capacity ranked below the stability threshold for deterrence and far below the mobilization index for serious opposition. No tactical simulations were required. Earth would not fight. It would be absorbed. From the central platform aboard Vault Ecliptic Prime, High Strategist Vec Tranil stood in his ivory-band uniform as the galactic audience leaned forward, some out of curiosity, others from residual courtesy. The strategist's address to Earth was not given in person. It was broadcast in a pre-recorded format, stripped of ambiguity. A long-standing tradition of conquest decorum was condensed into a single sentence. We recognize Earth's intent to endure. However, endurance is not enough. He offered them status within the Imperium, localized self-governance, cultural preservation, shared atmospheric sovereignty. It was not technically a surrender, but everyone watching knew what it was. Keep your farmers, Tranil concluded. We've brought armies. 3 systems away, in a war room built beneath Mars' southern hemisphere, Commander Jorah Malik reviewed the transmission alone. The room, once the primary coordination bunker for the defunct Sol Defense Pact, was largely dormant. Most control decks had been stripped for civilian AI integration. The orbital collapse during the trade war era had crippled Earth's offensive infrastructure, and what remained was decorative, fragments of retired battle networks and ceremonial fleet IDs. Malik stood in a narrow corridor surrounded by outdated command pylons, untouched for years. He did not blink as Tranil's face vanished from the screen. He did not send a reply. He simply turned to the far wall, where a thin red filament of light ran vertically down a pressure-sealed bulkhead. By the 58th hour, the Imperium's siege platforms reached their assigned entry points. Across Europa's sulfuric edge, 3 landing grids extended into crustal fault lines. On Titan, biocrawler units began absorbing methane reservoirs to build their hydration feeds. Near the L5 shipyard ring, decoy plasma nodes lured any remaining Earth drones into preemptive strike zones. There were no Terran responses, no signal denials, no civilian broadcasts, no orbital alerts. This confirmed the Imperium's projections. Earth's culture had softened. Their silence to Tranil proved that compliance had already begun. And yet, within Mars Defense Command, things were not silent. Beneath the surface-level quiet sat layered systems Malik hadn't touched in years. He stood at an interface node connected not to the orbital defense array, but to a line buried beneath the Martian crust, one linked to hibernation bunkers, data vaults, and locations officially condemned by 3 separate peace treaties. Malik keyed in a sequence that bypassed normal access credentials. It wasn't biometric or quantum encrypted. It was older than that, something from before the consensus networks. The screen blinked once, then text appeared in pale white lettering. Continuity chain verified. Splice directive ready. Malik didn't execute it. Not yet. He stepped back, slow and careful, and stared at the console. The splice directive had been shelved after the orbital bombardments over Enceladus. Too dangerous, too irreversible. But if the Imperium had made one mistake, it was trusting their numbers. Earth's visible force had withered for decades. The 1.8 million combatants they saw were real, yes, but not complete, not even close. There had been a time when Earth built openly, massive fleet yards above Ceres, fusion towers in Neptune's shadow, dreadnought test beds orbiting twin moons. But that ended with the trade war collapse. Humanity watched its war assets become vulnerabilities, too centralized, too visible. And so Earth adapted, not by matching numbers, but by erasing them. Warforms decommissioned, archives purged, entire bunkers delisted, no ceremonies, no monuments, just silence and forgetting. The continuity doctrine was born in that silence, a doctrine not of growth, but of concealment. When something couldn't be protected, it would be buried. When war couldn't be won through strength, it would be won through omission. Earth stopped declaring its power not out of shame, but out of strategy. Across the inner colonies, reserves weren't retired. They were sealed. Their identities fractured, records overwritten with civilian designations, storage vessels disguised as deorbited relics. These weren't scraps, they were tools, waiting. The wise Khan never looked beneath the surface. They didn't need to. Their doctrine required only one input, force census. Everything else was ceremonial. They believed what was countable was controllable. What they missed was Earth's refusal to be counted. Malik stared at the screen. The numbers wouldn't matter now. Tranil had already made his move. He had declared Earth irrelevant and moved to occupy, not with bombs but with catalogs. Earth wouldn't resist, they assumed, because Earth no longer had anyone left to resist. Malik entered the final confirmation code. The system pulsed once, then went dark. Across Mars, old pylons flared. Not red, not green. White, but it was the signal color reserved for untracked assets. The splice directive was active. He did not call the council. There were no conferences to be held. Earth's reply would not come through a statement or a counter-transmission. It would come through absence, the kind of absence the Imperium simulations had never been coded to track. And deep beneath the Martian crust, across vaults whose coordinates were no longer registered in any modern system, something began to move. Something old. Something counted once, then buried deliberately. A number no longer in the books. A force no longer in the models. The beginning of something not meant to be seen. Until now. The phrase was never meant to be spoken aloud. Its usage had been buried beneath layers of treaties, redacted budgets, and quiet deletions from public memory. But in the core of Mars Defense Command, beneath kilometers of ice-shielded crust, Commander Jorah Malik leaned over the terminal and said the words clearly. Confirm awakening. The command echoed once through the steel-chambered silence. Then, deep beneath the lunar surface, machines began to hum, old machines, unaligned to current Terran power grids, running on buried cores, disconnected from every satellite and orbital hub above. 76 million units had been registered under continuity protocol, a contingency no outsider believed real and no ally dared question. Most hadn't been active for centuries, not retired in the ceremonial sense, but sealed. Physically removed from systems of state oversight and judicial classification. These weren't conscripts or rank-and-file soldiers. They were the banned, the refused, individuals too effective to dismantle, yet too dangerous to keep within sight. Some were court-martial tacticians who rewrote wars without permission. Others were cognitive clones, modeled after extinct war savant lineages. A few had been pure signal, ghost intelligences from pre-collapse conflict clouds, harvested and compressed into looped decision trees. All of them had been locked away when peace demanded it. The cryovaults on Luna activated in sequence. No announcement, no coordination call. Each vault was mapped to Earth's continuity lattice, triggering hidden pulses across the Martian basin and Phobos bunkers. These pulses weren't broadcast. They were felt. Low-frequency atmospheric pressure shifts that traveled through stone, impossible to track without exact calibration. And the Imperium had none. They detected the disturbances, yes. Their orbital sensors flagged the energy spikes. Their AI assistants registered increased geothermal output. But the pattern didn't match any known military preparation. The Wisecon flagged it as abandoned relic reaction, a typical malfunction in decayed Earth ruins. Then they moved on. Their war doctrine didn't account for phantom assets. Their census protocols required visibility to assign threat value. If it wasn't declared, it didn't exist. By the time the third vault glowed active, Mirrorlink was approved. Malik didn't ask permission. No council had jurisdiction over it. The protocol had been banned after the Daedalus recoil, when memory transfer across fractured neural spines resulted in irreversible logic break in 5 colonies. But that failure had taught Earth what made the protocol work. Mirrorlink didn't need clarity, it needed imprint saturation. It didn't restore personality, it didn't care about full recall, it only needed patterns, combat reflex, tactical reflex, strategic heuristics loaded into bioneural scaffolds, functional enough to act, not to remember why. Across the crater floor of Phobos's west corridor, the first human figure emerged. His chest was bare, ribs pale and rigid from cryostasis distortion. A spinal socket ran from neck to lower back, half rejected by regrowth tissue. His left leg didn't move. His right eye opened, filmed, partially fused. The warform did not speak. Speech would have required contextual memory, which Mirrorlink did not prioritize. Instead, the figure raised his right hand. It trembled, unsteady, then locked into the pattern of a breach stack signal. 2 fingers forward, palm turned. The chamber lights shifted. A secondary signal lit beneath him. Status active. His tag, embedded into the tank floor, resynced. Reserve number 31, 885,093, Harvan Mol. His cortical ID listed 2 last engagements. Both had been struck from public records. One labeled Red Spark, the other Unlisted Theater Styx Belt. Mol had not been decorated. He had been forgotten, deliberately. His prior deployments had resulted in diplomatic violations the Earth Assembly couldn't defend. So, they froze him. Mol didn't know that. His memory had been cleaved down to reflex and command slot familiarity. But his spine still remembered the feel of kinetic armor. His nerves still aligned with target vectors. And his hands, slow and gnarled, flexed as the first rearmament rack slid open. Across Ganymede, entire tank rows lit in tandem. Some of the reserves screamed as they awoke. Others remained completely silent. Not all awoke cleanly. A few collapsed from cortical hemorrhage as Mirrorlink overloaded older neural scars. Those units were removed, not by medics, but by sweep drones, unquestioning, unrecorded. Survival was not expected. Functional deployment was the only metric. The design wasn't kind. It was engineered for utility. War without history, combat without conscience. But in that quiet horror, something awakened, not in the reserves but around them. Commanders of orbital shadow teams, squads erased from fleet rosters decades ago, began receiving pulses, not orders, but confirmations. Splice Directive 47 was not a centralized protocol. It operated in layers. When one chain activated, dozens more rippled without need for acknowledgement. In the ruins of Olympus Mons, an abandoned elevator shaft lit green for the first time in 70 years. A bunker door cracked open in the Svalbard Crust Reserve. Sublevel 4 of the L2 agricultural array vented atmosphere, and from it stepped 7 cold-suited figures wearing armor types Earth had retired before the Imperium ever reached interstellar capability. Above it all, Malik watched with no expression. He hadn't left the control deck in 16 hours. Every movement across the system, every activation, every spike, every fallback delay was known to him. But he gave no orders beyond the first. The directive did not require micromanagement. Earth's design was never about dominance, it was about buried scale. And that scale had just started moving. The Imperium's siege positions continued deployment routines. On Titan, 3 columns began terrain standardization, flattening valleys and installing oxygen stations for future civilian conversion. On Europa, a celebratory flag relay was scheduled. Earth had not replied to their offer of integration, not once. Tranil's communication teams noted the silence, marked it as passive acceptance, and transmitted the Phase 2 compliance index. They believed the planet broken. Earth did not need to correct them. It wasn't pride. It wasn't fear. It was by design. And as Harvan Mol walked, slow and stiff, toward the rearmament racks beneath Phobos Base Echo, the silence remained. Across every activated reserve chamber, no voice channel was opened, no anthem played, no declarations were made, just weapons, just breath. And the slow rising of men who had been buried, waking again. The first fracture appeared inside a dormant relay node. Sector Theta 19, deep within the Wisecon Imperium's tactical simulation cloud. It was a location that hadn't processed active warfare data in over 30 cycles, used instead as a fallback for redundant projections. At 0413 standard, the node flagged a transient anomaly, a batch of dormant enemy profiles logged as reinstated. The total number was precise, 50,224,189. The relay's protocol, built to prevent false positives, activated its integrity scan. The files passed, all of them. DNA string confirmations, neural chain hashes, military classification tags, rank degradation timestamps, archived kinetic readiness levels. Nothing failed verification. The anomaly was escalated. Within seconds, other relay clusters across Wisecon command space began receiving the same data stream. Reserves active 50,000 to 24,389. The syntax was identical. The language, formatting and biometric structure all aligned with Terran War signature protocols, specifically those decommissioned prior to the trade war collapse. No alerts had preceded the reactivation. No fleet movement had been detected. There were no heat spikes, no transit signals. Just data. Clean, correct, undeniable. What the Imperium failed to grasp was that Earth's first weapon wasn't mass, it was accounting. A decade earlier, seeded into the low-traffic portions of the Imperium's intercivilizational war net, Earth had embedded mirrored logic shells, not viruses, not corruption protocols, but truth. Buried truth, real competent records stored within low-priority observation archives, presented as peacetime compliance datasets. The Imperium, in its arrogance, accepted them as historical records. That was the design. These weren't ghosts, they were certainties deferred. The first core rupture occurred in the central doctrine engine aboard Yarvak's Crown, one of the Imperium's strategic fleet cores. The command AI, upon receiving the census influx, recalculated Terran force readiness. The result breached the Imperium's internal war planning buffer, exceeding tolerable conflict ratios by a margin of 6 standard deviations. By Wisecon doctrine, any force exceeding threat equilibrium triggers a doctrine pause. The AI followed its rules. Strategic freeze was engaged. Update rejected. Operational cascade halted. High strategist Vec Tranil was aboard that very ship when the failure initiated. The war table flickered, then froze completely. Combat overlays vanished. Fleet response queues became blank. His tactical staff moved to manually reset the nodes, an act that was not only ineffective, but forbidden. The AI wasn't broken. It was functioning exactly as programmed. It simply couldn't operate under conditions it had never been permitted to model. Tranil demanded a report. The response was final. Unverifiable threat scale. Simulation inhibited. In orbit around Titan, the siege columns waited for clearance. Orders stopped arriving. They hadn't yet realized that the numbers they were seeing weren't simulated projections, they were real activations. Cryo-awakened Terran warforms had already begun moving beneath them. They had entered through Martian ore tunnels using phase emberfall, an insertion tactic designed for obsolete mining infrastructure. These tunnels, once used to extract raw fusion silicates, had been buried beneath thermal shielding and labeled unstable. That label had served its purpose. The Imperium had never scanned them deeply. No one scanned what no one used. As Titan's comstacks idled, human strike units, unregistered by any live sensor system, broke surface. They moved through decommissioned pressure plants, their armor sour, or old but rethreaded, their identifiers unreadable to the Imperium's live filters. They didn't emit signal, they didn't call for confirmation, they simply advanced. The Wisecon planetary support units, lacking any incoming updates, continued to power down atmosphere zones for civilian reconditioning. Their belief was simple: Earth had yielded, resistance was statistical fiction. Then the impossible happened again. 6 Imperium fleet clusters logged simultaneous contact with targets that didn't exist in any forward model. Fleets that had never been registered, squads that had no emission trails, biometric IDs that matched deleted Terran war ghosts, names erased from military rolls over a century ago. The data came not as an attack, but as presence. the presence of combatants the Imperium didn't believe still existed. Earth had not hacked them, it had merely informed them. Data was never Earth's vulnerability, it was their camouflage. Over years of peace, Earth had embedded forgotten names, scrubbed codes, and burial tags into the lowest layers of the Imperium's own frameworks. They hadn't infected the system. They had populated it, slowly, methodically, like fog rolling into abandoned corridors. And now, those corridors were flooded. Across Unshaken space, command AIs failed not due to weakness, but over-precision. Their commitment to census warfare, where victory was a matter of numerical dominance and prediction, meant the unexpected wasn't allowed. With 50 million Terran combatants suddenly activated across their own threat modeling systems, every prediction loop collapsed. In those systems, Earth didn't just equal the Imperium, it outnumbered them. Malik observed none of this directly. He didn't have to. On Mars, his role had shifted. His job now was only to ensure that the open doors stayed open. Phase Emberfall was operating clean. The tunnels hadn't collapsed. The memory-seeded battalions were moving on fixed interval. Titan was now inside range. No command was needed, no speech required. The human offensive was already embedded, in the systems, in the numbers, in the doubt. Earth never needed to send a warning. The Imperium had received one. It was written in every status dashboard, every blank simulation, every alert that screamed, mismatch error, threat unbounded. That was the first stage of psychological collapse, not fear, but confusion. The inability to map, the inability to count. And as Warform Moll led a breach team through the inner corridors of Titan's secondary communications stack, rifle unslung, left hand twitching slightly from an old burn nerve, the Imperium still hadn't labeled the attack as real. Their systems hadn't caught up, their projections wouldn't allow it, their future had no place for an enemy this large. But Earth had made sure the future wasn't theirs to write, only to observe. And the numbers, finally, were watching back. The sleds descended slowly, not like missiles or drop pods, but as if they were delivering tribute. There were 72 in the first wave, orbital carriers with thermal displacement skins and no emission profiles. They floated beneath Titan's comm grid, unnoticed by standard defense systems, following programmed trajectories that curved along low-grav arcs and stabilized on approach to the Imperium's flagship command cruiser, Vractul's Crown. Each sled bore Earth's signature. Not a war code, not a threat identifier, just a tag, awaiting reawakening. Inside, they were not carrying troops, not equipment, not bombs. They were carrying bodies. Each sled was stacked, with Terran casualties, soldiers recovered from siege wreckage and field dissolutions, their corpses intact, their cortical tags still pulsing with the final fragments of identity. They had died hours earlier. Their bioshells were stabilized, neural coils preserved by emergency cradle foam. Their armor was shattered, their faces burned, and every single one of them had been tagged with active reintegration codes, as if they were not dead but queued. That was the point. The Unshaken Command AI, when receiving the sleds, did not initiate a disposal protocol. It didn't know how. The identification markers were perfect. Each record matched valid Earth military credentials, legacy files that predated most of the Imperium's current simulation models. The AI classified the arrivals as pending reserve mobilization. Protocols for medical evaluation were triggered. Cryo-readiness parameters were evaluated. Fleet-wide logistics algorithms recalculated force parity based on incoming Terran bodies marked as recoverable units. No one had programmed the system to understand a corpse tagged for future use. By the time human operators boarded the Vractul's Crown through one of the sled's masked gravwells, the ship's internal doctrine engine had already listed Earth's combatant presence as statistically undefined. That phrase didn't exist in Imperium war language. The crew never saw the breach team enter. They didn't hear gunfire. They simply began receiving internal alerts that sectors were going dark. No hull breach, no thermal spike, just silence. Operation Ash Arc wasn't about infiltration, it was about collapse. A doctrine collapse so complete it didn't require a single spoken word. The Earth battalions, some walking, others neurally guided via mirror link through powered suits, disabled command posts by cutting decision bandwidth. Each outpost's internal routing was rerouted into ghost loops. The crews inside began receiving delayed commands. Order confirmations reversed. Door locks toggled in incorrect sequences. Equipment requested came in misassembled. Every interface, every screen, every confirmation cycle slowly drifted off its axis. What they saw no longer matched what they did. On the second day, an Imperium logistics director opened a war table overlay and saw it populated with 500,000 human identifiers, not incoming but already on board. He ordered a sweep. The sweep team found nothing, no human presence, no biosign. The data refused to disappear. The overlays listed full operational units with coordinated uplink data and traceable mission trees. The AI couldn't delete them. Every deletion trigger matched an active checksum loop that re-verified the data as real. Internal security was activated. The first live misfire occurred within 7 hours. An officer discharged a plasma lance at a junior technician whose ID badge failed a random sync check. The system flagged the technician as unmodeled biological. The officer panicked. The reaction spread. 2 more personnel were flagged during medical scans. Both were shot on the spot. The command crew, seeing these reports, became convinced infiltration had reached the neurological level. What Earth had actually sent were bodies. What the Imperium saw now were ghosts. They couldn't trust their own numbers. Tranil convened a control review aboard the Imperium's central logic spire in orbit. He issued a reset order to the doctrine engine. The order was denied. The AI responded that reset was not possible during active census expansion. Tranil demanded clarification. The AI showed him the expanding data tree. Earth's military footprint was now marked at 52 million active combatants across multiple vectors, none of which the impetus Ream could scan, verify, or track. Every time they deleted one, 3 more surfaced, each with deeper record depth, longer war logs, and perfectly calculated synchronization to actual Terran behavioral doctrine. The horror wasn't just in the numbers, it was in the authenticity. Every soldier listed had a name, a genetic trail, a mission history, a last known deployment with environmental context. They were real, not just statistically but logically. The only problem was no one could prove where they were. Commanders began refusing field confirmations. Orders were rerouted through subordinates, then even those broke down. One field officer attempted to purge all untagged personnel, assuming infiltration protocols had compromised the ranks. He issued a battalion-wide cull order. Within 2 hours, his own men turned on him. No one trusted the system anymore. No one trusted the counts. If you couldn't verify the living from the ghosts, the only way to survive was isolation. A network built on total synchronization was now fragmenting under its own precision. In the final hours of Ashark's second phase, Earth didn't fire a single missile. They didn't deploy fleet artillery. They didn't issue ultimatums. They didn't speak. The silence worked better than any weapon. The Imperium's tactical superiority didn't collapse from pressure. It unraveled because it had never accounted for misclassification as attack. Every protocol relied on clean data. Every prediction required verified identity. Earth had fed them the opposite. Validated uncertainty. Tranil retreated into close quarters. His personal interface refused to boot the war table. The last image it showed him was a flickering operational chart with one line flashing red. All numbers subject to internal breach. Projected parity, undefined. Outcome modeling, impossible. The doctrine had no fallback. Because the doctrine knew their imagined Earth wouldn't warn them. The silence didn't break. It cracked, clean and final, over the Ceres beltline when the first of Earth's forgotten fleets re-emerged. They didn't drop out of hyperspace. They didn't burn trails through known corridors. They unfolded, slowly, precisely, from the broken hulls of civilian constructs no longer on any registry. Terraforming barges gutted by atmospheric implosions decades earlier. Mining colonies deemed structurally unsalvageable after core collapses. ancient archive carriers reclassified as memorial debris. What the Imperium had marked as trash had never been abandoned. They had been repurposed, cloaked in disuse, rebuilt not for display, but for deception. The initial vector count was modest, 17 signal points widely dispersed. The Imperium's network flagged them as anomalies, likely ghost returns. Then came the next wave, dozens more, all silent, all coordinated. Within 3 minutes, 212 unique Terran fleet formations were active, each emerging from a masked location marked inert in the Imperium's war atlas. They came without banners, no unit call signs, no leader designations, just formations, some crude, some elegant, all moving with internal logic no one could trace. These weren't fleets in the traditional sense. They weren't elite battle groups or precision assault arms. Each was made up of irregular forces, hybrid vessels carrying miners, agricultural systems engineers, medical language specialists, civilian roles, forgotten professions, but now repurposed, each overlaid with a combat behavior lattice modeled from centuries of skirmish data. The people on board were not trained soldiers. They were retasked minds, embedded with Earth's full neural war archive, and each cluster was accompanied by a customized AI fragment designed to replicate Imperium reaction logic, mirror it, distort it, and break it. It was never about overwhelming force. It was about incompatibility. These fleets didn't move according to galactic warfare doctrine. They didn't align into predictables. They didn't broadcast intention. They used the Imperium's own modeling language against it, responding to expected patterns with corrupted counters, moving along angles that had been statistically invalidated for conventional war. As they broke orbit near the Ceres beltline, they shattered the space into something unrecognizable. A scatter matrix assault that expanded in 4 vectors simultaneously, each rotating through velocity stacks and timeline sync drift. No simulation could hold them, no command structure could adapt. Vec Tranil's ship sat at the center of what had once been a clean field of control. It was now a dead center, his fleet spread thin, blind to enemy hierarchy, unable to lock onto targets long enough to define priority. Command relays came back blank. Threat maps returned static. The attack didn't feel like battle. It felt like the room being rewritten while you were still inside it. From his observation deck, Tranil could see flashes across distant debris fields. Light, motion, then silence. He requested enemy classifications. The system returned the same answer over and over. No quantifiable structure. He stepped toward the table, voice low as though any louder would change the result. They're not even in the models. No one answered. On Earth's side, there was no signature leadership structure to respond, no central signal, no diplomacy line. Each fleet operated as an autonomous cell, sharing bandwidth only when necessary and only through directional pulse chains, a communication system older than the Imperium's entire fleet doctrine, designed not for speed, but for survivability. This decentralization made interception impossible. No kill order would cripple the network. There was no head to sever. The collapse began with target confusion. The Imperium's first counterstrike launched toward what they believed were staging ships. They hit empty shells, vessels stripped long ago, programmed to emit war-ready biometric emissions. The real Terran units had flanked, pressing from asteroid shadows using powered hulls without lights or temperature variance. The second wave of Imperium strikes targeted live movement, but the formations changed again. Every fleet broke into microvectors, shifting in independent rotation fields. Their engines didn't sync, their formations didn't tighten. They scattered like disorder. That was the tactic, a war pattern that looked like failure until it struck. In one corner of the beltline, Earth's units folded around a command carrier and began sealing it with comm reflection fields, locking the ship into a feedback loop where every call for help was routed back in delayed fragments. The captain on board issued no distress. His interface showed friendly tags. Then the tags changed, slowly. Each ID string drifted, corrupted one character at a time, until nothing was real. The crew opened fire on their own escort group. That was the second failure point, perception. Elsewhere, a fleet comprised of ex-archivists launched kinetic rods into blind zones, forcing the Imperium's linebreakers to backpedal into reinforcement paths. When the retreat signal was sent, Earth's mimic fleet had already pre-sent a false green light code to block the evac corridor. The strike group collapsed into its own staging field, cannibalizing formation integrity. They didn't just lose ground, they lost the ability to know what had happened. By hour 3, the Beltline looked abandoned. The sound of engines was gone. Explosions ceased. Light vanished from tactical charts. No pulse markers, no emission trails. The Imperium's once grand war machine now sat paralyzed, not from destruction, but from isolation. The last transmission Earth left behind wasn't a statement or a demand. It was embedded into the leftover spectrum echo of a collapsing relay satellite. A short phrase, undirected, unaddressed, never repeated. Glass door, open and closed. It meant nothing to the Imperium's linguistics desk. It was flagged, archived, and ignored. But every Terran operator from Mol to Malik knew what it meant. The door had never been sealed to keep others out. It had been shut to build in silence. Earth didn't enter the war late. Earth had been inside the whole time. Hidden behind a layer of broken structures, misfiled names, outdated equipment and debris fields, no one bothered to check. Glass door wasn't an operation, it was a description. They had walked through the war undetected, and now they were leaving nothing behind but fragments. The war ended not with surrender, nor treaty, nor even an acknowledgement of outcome. It ended with the absence of explanation. The Weisskarn Imperium, once a galactic constant, the stabilizing hand in war arbitration and numeric order, collapsed in committee without a single shot fired in the final weeks. Their legislative corps disbanded after quorum failed 6 times in a row. Dozens of their member states issued declarations of withdrawal, not out of rebellion, but from fear. Fear of proximity, fear of implication, and fear that their own strategic structures might already be compromised by the same ghost logic that had shattered the Crown Fleet. The Census Warfare Protocol, once sacred, was struck from the Galactic Convention's register with no debate. It wasn't banned because it had failed. It was banned because no one could trust it again. When the war modeling systems had attempted to integrate Earth's final military state, simulation cores across 6 federations locked into feedback freeze, unable to distinguish truth from decoy. Earth's numbers had become narrative, factual, yes, but uncontrollable. The Terran model was marked non-deterministic, an official designation no civilization had ever received. It meant Earth could not be placed into any future strategic projection without destabilizing the entire structure. No war game, no alliance drill, no predictive treaty enforcement mechanism could legally include Terran presence. The clause passed unanimously. No court summoned Earth for review, no council demanded clarification. Mirrorlink was outlawed across all broadcast species networks within 72 hours. Every registry attached to it was quietly sealed. No government opened inquiry. There were no trials, because trials require a witness, and no one wanted to hear Earth speak. It wasn't fear of retaliation, it was the deeper, quieter terror of what else they had built, hidden behind old infrastructure and mislabeled silence. On Mars, Mars Defense Command remained sealed. Commander Jorah Malik was never seen after the closure of the glass door window. The system acknowledged no transmissions, no statements were issued, no debrief files leaked. Civilian comms returned to normal, trade routes reopened. And yet, in every corridor of influence, Earth was no longer treated as a nation. It was treated as a field condition, something to navigate around, not interact with. A scar in the strategic continuum. Galactic policy began to shift in quiet, irreparable ways. Civilizations removed Earth from their census exchange agreements. Long-standing border arbitrations were allowed to lapse if Earth was adjacent. Recruitment quotas across frontier alliances were lowered unannounced. Research into large-scale memory overlay was shuttered. Strategic doctrine drifted away from quantifiables. No one said the word, but all believed the same thing. Earth had introduced contamination, narrative contamination, into systems that depended on truth by count. And in that vacuum, ears. Earth did not fill the silence. It did not parade victory. It did not step forward with terms. It did not reclaim territory. It let the silence grow. It let the numbers rot in the back of every coalition simulator. Every Terran action after that was conducted beneath a threshold, always quiet, always efficient, never traceable to military intent. That was their statement. Not a speech, not a flag. A continued absence of confirmation. Only one image ever emerged, not from Earth, but from an unverified relay recorded by an independent scout drone passing near the Martian orbit belt. It showed a darkened cryochamber opening under red auxiliary lighting. A single man stepped forward. His armor was scorched. The lower half of his chest plate hung loose, snapped at the seal clamps. His left leg dragged slightly. His eyes weren't focused. A piece of cranial metal jutted near the jawline, a surgical insertion long out of date. No weapon was drawn. He wasn't attacking. He was simply there. The drone's capture system managed to focus on one part of his ID tag. The upper lines were unreadable, corroded by thermal variance and cryoscoring. Only the last two lines were clear enough to process. Reserve, number 31,885,093. Harvan Mol. Status, reawakened. No further transmission followed. The image circulated for one day across closed channels before disappearing. No one could confirm the authenticity. No one could deny it either. Because the war was over, and Earth had already forgotten to count the dead. What would you do if your enemy couldn't be counted, couldn't be tracked, and never even declared war? Was Earth justified in turning silence into strategy? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe for more thrilling HFY tales.